On today's special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks, we have our eyes set on Kirill Kaprizov versus Quinn Hughes, but don't overlook the goalie matchup. Road Warrior Kevin Lankinen and Filip Gustavsson. Let's dive in. This is going to be a good one.
Hey, this is Matt Goldie, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings and welcome into a special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks as we get you set for the big tilt between the Minnesota Wild and the Vancouver Canucks. We thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. We are, of course, your team each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Get those subs up on YouTube for both shows. And if you listen on the go, in the car, on your phone, when you're at the gym, wherever you tune in, we appreciate having you along for the ride. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode, we'll dive into all of the particulars for a big matchup between two of the top teams in the West, the Minnesota Wild and the Vancouver Canucks. Trevor Beggs of Locked On Canucks joining us as we dive in. We got to talk first, though, about a player who I think quite literally came out of nowhere and has really been a godsend for the Canucks. Beggsy, let's dive into the secret sauce for the Canucks so far. Kevin Lankinen, and be honest with me, this is something that all Canucks fans definitely saw coming when the season started, right?
100%, man. I mean, look at the analytics experts over at Clear Sight Analytics. And we got Kevin Woodley here from Vancouver, NHL.com reporter, who even said at the time of the signing and throughout the summer that he was surprised that Kevin Lankinen wasn't signed yet. And obviously Kevin Lankinen was chasing a bit of a bigger bag than, what he ended up getting paid in Vancouver. But he obviously saw the opportunity here with Thatcher Demko out for God knows how long. That he had the chance to be a starting netminder on a team that was the fifth last team standing in the NHL last season. So Kevin Lankinen, he was listening to the Indeed.com ad reads here on the Locked On Network in September because he was unemployed. And here the Canucks come in, swooping him up and signing him right on the eve of training camp for a nice $875,000 per year. Unbelievable stuff. And right now, here's a stat for you. Kevin Lankinen by himself, with third overall in the NHL with 12 wins. Only Jake Ottinger and Connor Hellebuck have more wins than Kevin Lankinen. And 10 of those 12 wins have come on the road. I mean, it's been an unreal start for him. He's come up big in some clutch moments. Honestly, the numbers, aside from the record, if you start digging into the save percentage and some of the even strength save percentage stats, I don't think they paint the same picture for how good he's been. He's just been so clutch for the Canucks. Game against the Sabres last week, I think, was a prime example. He lets in a couple goals, but the Canucks get thoroughly outplayed, but they get to overtime because of Lankinen. He makes a tremendous stop off of Tage Thompson all alone in front, and the Canucks go back the other way and win the game. So he's been so clutch for this team, and hey, man, I think it's just because he reads a lot of books, man. The guy's got his own book club, okay? He's well-read, he's a smart guy, and he knows how to play goalie too.
Hey, that never hurts, and that is the kind of thing that can certainly make or break a season. And if we just rewind to the start of the year, you have Thatcher Demko, as you alluded to, who has yet to play a game for the Canucks this year. He was hurt, and it just there have been some attempts at a timetable, but it just seems like nobody really knows when he's going to come back. And he is not only just a goalie, like he was one of the best goalies in the league last year. And so you can't just throw anybody in there to replace that type of production, somebody who was amongst the leaders in goals saved above expected last year. But I think Lankinen has just shown that if you put a guy in the right spot if you put him in the right system, whether it be a player, whether it be a goalie, you can get some really good results. And it is a combination that is working very similarly to what the Wild have right now. One of the best defenses in terms of expected 5-on-5 goals against, and one of the best goalie tandems. It shows you how much a defense can help out a goalie, but also how much a goalie can really help the defense. It's a symbiotic relationship between the two, and as much as Vancouver has excelled at it, so have the Minnesota Wild.
Yeah, Philip Gustafson, he's a member of my fantasy hockey team. Hello. Having a nice bounce back season over there. And how about the Ottawa Senators and all the guys they've given up on, eh? Philip Gustafson, Cam Talbot. Who else am I missing? There's another one out there who's doing some damage. Joey Decord in Seattle. So thank you to the Ottawa Senators and our friends over at Locked On Sens for helping out other teams around the NHL by giving away good goalies.
Yeah, those poor Locked On Sens hosts. I mean, they gave up a couple of goals right off the bat to Anaheim in their most recent game. Like, just have a normal game, please. I'm begging you guys. It is really interesting to look at these two goalies because you got Philip Gustafson leading the league in goals against average and save percentage, but then you've got Lankinen, as you mentioned, who is right up there amongst the leaders in wins. And I think we're going to get into the game itself in a little bit, but I think it is a nice little precursor to, I wouldn't expect this matchup to have the same sort of scoring as it did last year in that game in which the Wild rallied back from a huge deficit and won 10-7. Like, don't expect that many fireworks in this matchup because these teams get good goaltending and they play great defense too.
Yeah, let's look at a few games before that one, Seth, because that one was wild. I think that was almost the end of Casey DeSmith's time in Vancouver, more or less. He might have played a few games after that, but I almost think this management team had chosen young Artur Silovs over DeSmith after that performance. But in the games before that one, the 10-7 debacle in Minnesota there, it was a 2-1 Wild win in a shootout, 2-0 Canucks win, and the season before, 2-1 Wild win, 3-0 Wild win. So you're looking at, do those four games combined even have as many goals as the game in February last year? No, they don't. So like you said, Seth, it's, again, you look at these two teams and you mentioned the Wild have the second lowest expected goals against at even strength. The Canucks actually have the third lowest expected goals against at even strength too. So, analytically speaking, there's not a lot that separates these teams defensively. Now, I will say that in Vancouver, at least, the analytics hasn't really matched the eye test so far because this Canucks defense has been kind of leaky. Really, you look at that number and you're going like, oh man, these Canucks are a pretty good defensive team. Look at Seth. Yeah, you're doing a good job. Look at Rick Tocchet and Adam Foote. They're getting the job done again. But the story about the Canucks, the dirty truth about the Canucks is they absolutely crushed the minutes where Quinn Hughes is on the ice. And they've kind of struggled in the minutes outside of that. And specifically, the pairing of Carson Soucy, former Wild defenseman Carson Soucy, and Tyler Myers has been an absolute train wreck defensively. So in Vancouver this season, I think they're propped up by a sheltered third pair of Eric Brandstrom and whoever he's been with playing pretty well. Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronek, who, again, they're missing Hronek as well. He's injured. That pair has crushed their minutes, whereas Soucy and Myers have just gotten absolutely caved in at even strength.
Yeah, it's defensively, it's been, I'm not going to lie, it's been pretty rock solid for the Minnesota Wild so far this season. And obviously you'd expect that with players like Brock Faber, with Jared Spurgeon, with Jake Middleton, with Jonas Brodin, and even the third pairing that we had a lot of question marks coming into the season of John Merrill and Zach Bogosian. Those guys have even played serviceable hockey so far this season to where they're not getting olayed like Dmitry Kulikov did against the St. Louis Blues in the postseason, where you've got him just standing in front of the net, basically ushering people in. Like that gif of that security guard that's barely patting people down as they go into the concert. Like, you need a little better defense than that, and the Wild have had it so far this season. Declan Chisholm, former Winnipeg Jets defenseman, who was put on waivers because the Jets opted to keep Logan Stanley, the gift that keeps on giving, and those that know. He's been great too. He's stepped into an elevated role with Jonas Brodin injured the last few games, and he's done great. Like, it's a decor that limits chances, and if you have goalie play like you're getting from Philip Gustafsson, and you have a defense that limits the chances even beyond that, that's pretty tough for teams to find a way through. It's like trying to navigate the hedge maze in The Shining in pitch black. Like, there's just no way to do it. It's too difficult.
Man, I love the use of the metaphor there, Seth. That's where they pay the big bucks here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's all about painting that picture, and how better to do it than a scenario in which it's pitch dark and you're trying to go through a maze. So not only have we set the scene with the defenses both being rock solid from a statistical standpoint, goalie play's been really, really good, but as you alluded to when we were getting this all set up, it turns out both teams have some pretty good players on the roster to really keep an eye on. And so we are going to dive in. We got to talk some Kirill. We got to talk some Quinn Hughes too. So we'll discuss as we continue today's crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks right after this. We are your team each and every day. Today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. One of my favorite features of PrizePicks is the ability to cross sports. Yes, you can pick athletes from different sports. For instance, in Minnesota, you could go with Justin Jefferson to hit his over on receiving yards. You could also go with Kirill Kaprizov to go over 1.5 points a game. It seems like he does that all the time. And if you want to get in on the Minnesota Twins, you can take the under, no matter what the stat is, because it's the Minnesota Twins. Sorry, Locked On Twins. Keep it rolling, because I know that's a tough one over there right now, covering that team. But PrizePicks makes selecting your favorite players and whether they will hit their stats totals as easy as possible. And if you sign up right now, you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Welcome back to today's crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks. We are your team each and every day, and we get you ready to roll for a big tilt between the Wild and the Canucks. More on the game itself coming up in segment 3, but Trevor, we got to talk about 2 pretty good players that are on either side of this matchup. I, of course, could glow about Kirill Kaprizov all day, leading the league in points as of the time that we're recording this, although it wouldn't surprise me at all if Kirill found a way to get 1 or 2 points on an off day. That's how good he's been so far this season, but that's the tip of the iceberg from a star power standpoint, because you got a pretty darn good defenseman over there on the other side in Quinn Hughes. I know expectations for these players are always high, but has Quinn Hughes taken it to another level even than you thought possible here this season?
Yes, he has. And the crazy thing about Quinn Hughes is that you saw him level up last season, and he's leveled up since last season. Oh, and a season, by the way, in which he won the Norris Trophy as the best defenseman in the NHL. And even just I was going through some stats here quickly, looking at Brock Faber versus Quinn Hughes, the top 2 defensemen. And, even Brock Faber's an amazing defenseman, and Quinn Hughes dwarfs him in almost every stat out there in terms of the advanced analytics. It's just the Canucks, like I mentioned before, they absolutely control play with Quinn Hughes on the ice. If you want to look at expected goals for among defensemen so far this season, the only pair with a better expected goals for percentage than Quinn Hughes is the duo of Shane Gostisbehere and Sean Walker, who are playing third pairing minutes in Carolina. Quinn Hughes, on a nightly basis, he played 31 minutes against the Detroit Red Wings the other night. He's averaging around 25 minutes a game this season, and he crushes those minutes. Again, the Canucks are just a different team without Quinn Hughes on the ice, but when he's on the ice, they're one of the best two damn teams in the league. And Seth, I'm glad we're doing this episode because at about the dozen game mark, I was saying that Quinn Hughes and Kirill Kaprizov have been the best two players in the NHL this season. And now we're at the quarter mark. I'm keeping it bold. In a league with McKinnon, Makar, and McDavid, the best two players in the NHL this season have been Kirill Kaprizov and Quinn Hughes.
Yeah, it's so true. And the numbers that Kaprizov continues to put on the board they boggle the mind. It is hard to fathom, as good as he's been in his career, that he has found a way to also up it. But we kind of saw this coming a little bit last year because you had John Hynes come in on the 27th. And from then to the end of the year, Kirill finished the season on about 114-point pace because I think one really big key to this puzzle is that John Hynes has really tapped into how to effectively use Kaprizov to make sure that he is flowing on all cylinders, because in his own admission, sometimes it takes him a few minutes to really get going in particular games. And Hynes has double shifted him regularly. He has snuck him in on the third or the fourth line anytime anybody's in the penalty box. There is no scenario in which John Hynes, and I mean, let's be honest, it's Kirill Kaprizov. There isn't going to be a scenario that you don't play him, but every scenario you could think of, John Hynes has deployed him so far this year, and I don't think it's any coincidence that he's on pace right now for a very tidy 51 goals and 79 assists in 79 projected games for a grand total of 130 points, which you may as well take the Minnesota Wild record book at this point and burn it, because Kirill Kaprizov is already in possession of a bunch of the records, and by the time he's done in Minnesota, he's going to have them all. Like he just moved into second place in all-time power play goals with his power play tally against the Nashville Predators. And there just is nothing. There's nothing that he can't do. And every time he's on the ice, it's appointment viewing. Every time he has the puck, it's appointment viewing. Because even at this point in his career, he's been doing this now. He hit the 300 game mark. He's been doing this for a little while. Every time he's on the ice, there's a chance he's going to do something you've never seen before. And we haven't really gotten into the potential extension discussion much because I don't really view it as something that needs to be talked about a ton until we get to the offseason and it can actually be negotiated. But those are the types of players that deserve, like, write the check out, fill in an amount and sign it, and you're going to get it. Because he has become everything that the Minnesota Wild is because of what he brings to the ice. He's that good.
Yeah, and it's for me as an outsider, it's kind of exciting to see him enter that Hart Trophy discussion this season. I mean, I think coming into the season, regardless, you consider him a top 10 player in the NHL, a guy who has a chance to hit 100 points every season. And even when I look at the underlying profile of Kirill Kaprizov this season, to me, the only red flag really is a PDO of 106 overall. So you expect that to come down a little bit. We saw it with a lot of Canucks stars last season. But what does that mean? He's maybe an 150 and 120 point players as opposed to 130 point player. I mean, We're grasping at straws here. We're still talking about one of the best damn players in the NHL. And so far, the shooting percentage this season of 20.3%. I mean, JT Miller last seaon, when he hit 100 points, had a shooting percentage of 19%. So when you're as good as a player like Miller or Kaprizov, you're going to have years where you might score on one out of every 5 shots. And that's a dangerous thing for the NHL. But I'm just saying, Seth, it wouldn't shock me to see both of our stars in the conversation, the Hart Trophy conversation. And I do think Hughes has a chance to get in there. I do wonder, like, casual fans and on the East Coast there, if they realize how great Hughes is. But when you watch the Canucks tomorrow night, without Quinn Hughes on the ice, they're a completely different team when Quinn Hughes is on the ice and you get one of the other 4 defensemen out there.
Yeah, it's it leads to just some really exciting play. And, the crazy thing too is we think of Kirill as this offense only guy. He has right now, he is closing in on his career high in a season for defensive point shares. Like, I think he has 1.2 defensive point shares so far this season. So he's contributing on both sides of the ice, which is even scarier because if he can become even like a serviceable defenseman, like, just shut it down. Stop the count. Like, he's going to just enter into another stratosphere in terms of how valuable he is to this Minnesota Wild franchise. So he's the full package, and he took a slap shot to the face early on in the season. He got stitches, and he came back into the game without any sort of a bucket. He's like, no, I'm good. Like, just an absolute lunatic out there, but I mean that in the most sincere way possible. And just so easy to watch. So easy to watch him do his thing. It's fun. It's going to be a lot of fun to see these two go toe-to-toe for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And might I remind Canucks fans that last time the Canucks and Wild played in that crazy 10-7 game, Kirill Kaprizov did have a hat trick. And, he has 8 goals and 16 points in 9 career games versus the Vancouver Canucks. So, he is torched this team so far in his young NHL career, and it would be I wouldn't be betting against him to do the same on Tuesday night.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the game, and we're also going to take a look at a few guys that were just waiting for the engine to turn over in terms of their production so far this season. Because, as I alluded to early on in the show, I think we both have a center that we could name on the roster that you just would like to see a little bit more from. So we'll dive into all the particulars as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks. After this, we are your team each and every day. Today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Hopefully, you had a good feeling about the Minnesota Vikings this past Sunday to come from behind and beat the Arizona Cardinals. If you had the Vikings to cover the second half, congratulations to you, because that was a nifty little bet that I'm sure paid big dividends. You can bet on those. You can bet on the NFL. You can bet on all sorts of other sports by heading to FanDuel.com today. And if you do, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Vikings play the Atlanta Falcons this weekend. Kirk O'Chain's making his return to US Bank Stadium. Take the Vikings. Just do it. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Home stretch of today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks. Again, we thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Trevor Beggsy joining us from Locked On Canucks. And if you haven't checked out Locked On Canucks, if you're a Minnesota Wild fan, you want a little more intel ahead of the game, make sure to check out Locked On Canucks, because it is a vibe with a capital VIBE. One of my favorite shows in the entirety of the network. So good work, fellas, and cultivate that brand, cultivate that vibe, and Locked On Wild listeners, definitely check it out. Should we talk about some players that we just want to see a little bit more from so far this season? And I'm going to ask this without fully knowing if he has stepped it up in light of other players being out of the lineup, but a guy that I was banging the table for the Minnesota Wild to sign if for some reason he didn't re-up with the Canucks was, of course, Elias Pettersson. I was screaming for the Wild to throw everything they could and go get him, but of course he re-upped with Vancouver, so that dream is dead. How is Pettersson doing so far? I know it was a really slow start to the season for him. Has he started to kind of get back into game shape or where Canucks fans expect him to be, or is it still kind of a work in progress?
I would say that he seems like he's fully back. It was a slow start for Pettersson, like you alluded to, a very rough month of October. But since November 1st, Elias Pettersson is top 20 in league scoring. I believe the only Wild player ahead of him is, of course, Kirill Kaprizov. So since November 1st, Pettersson has 6 goals, 17 points in 14 games. He just had a 3-assist game against the Detroit Red Wings. Here's the thing about Elias Pettersson, and you mentioned it. I think there would be 31 other teams banging at the drum to get Elias Pettersson on their team if he were to leave the Canucks. But the dude's faced a lot of vitriol in this market. I know it's a rabid fan base in Vancouver, and I try to calm the people down on the show and say believe in Pettersson, but often we get pushback because the guy's making $11.6 million a season. So there is not just a heightened expectation. He's the 5th highest paid player in the NHL this season. So you expect a lot from him, but the thing about Pettersson, and obviously we track it pretty close over Locked On Canucks, in my mind and what the analytics show, he had a rough first 5 games of the season. After that, the defensive baseline was there, but every time he had the puck, it's just like Austin Powers, where he lost his mojo. He was just bobbling it, making the wrong play, throwing it to the other team. So his game has evolved as the season's gone on, and really since November, it looks like he's kind of turned the page. He looks more and more like the Pettersson of old. One critique is he probably isn't shooting enough, considering how good his shot is. He tends to almost always look for his teammates, and you commend the guy for that. But for God's sakes, Pete, he got one of the best shots in the NHL. Shoot it a bit more. But aside from that, it's really hard to complain with what he's done. And, especially with JT Miller on an indefinite leave right now, it's the guy that had to step up was Elias Pettersson. And there's been other guys that have stepped up, of course. The Canucks have been, I think they're 4-2 since Miller left the lineup. But Elias Pettersson, taking the bull by the horns, he's really looked strong in the past, 14, 15 games here.
One player who was pivotal in that 10-7 comeback win for the Wild last year, because he also had a monster game. He had a hat trick. I think he had a 5-point night. Joel Eriksson Ek. And so far this season, he's got 5 goals, 13 points in 21 games. And so a little bit of a slow start for Ek. And I had a listener ask about this in my last live show that we did on Sunday. And I think it stems from an injury, because we've heard rumblings that Ek is basically playing on one leg at this point in the season, which is always something that you absolutely don't want to hear about a player that is that important to the lineup. And so I think that has probably robbed some of the offensive abilities for Ek. It just hasn't been clicking in the same way. But that's also probably because Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy have just been walking on the sun so far this season. And Ek was, by and large, the number 2 option for this team in the early part of the season last year. So am I concerned about Joel Eriksson Ek? Well, obviously on the injury point, yes. But I think just because Matt Boldy has stepped into that number 2 role for the Wild, I think that explains the lack of offensive production so far. And Beggsy, Matt Boldy, by the way, he's on pace for a nice little 40-40 season himself. And you talk about a guy who, there are some here in the state of Minnesota that are convinced that he only scores against the San Jose Sharks, that he only scores against bottom feeder teams, that he's the Blake Bortles of NHL players because he only scores in garbage time and meaningless games, which is one of the craziest things I've ever heard in my life. Matt Boldy's turned into the number 2 option for this team, and he said it himself. Had a chance to talk to him before the season started. He's ready for that pressure. He wants it. He says, game on. I want those shots. I want those opportunities. And he has been, I think, one of the big surprises for the Minnesota Wild so far this season in stepping up and getting to where we had hoped he would get. And now he's here.
Yeah, man, oh man, it hurts to hear you say that because Matt Boldy is kind of the one who got away in Vancouver. I mean, I don't always get it right when I'm analyzing prospects, but the guy I wanted for the Canucks at the 10th overall spot in 2019 was Matt Boldy, and showed it to the late great Jason Botchford here from Vancouver, amazing beat writer who passed away shortly after the 2019 draft. He was banging the drum for Boldy as well, saying, "Can you imagine how good Boldy and Pettersson would be together?" And of course, we take Vasily Podkolzin, who we just traded for a 4th-round pick to the Coilers. And oh, by the way, Matt Boldy drafted 2 spots later, is like you said, on pace for 40 goals, 80 points. Yeah, that one hurts a bit. I'm not gonna
lie. As we wrap up today, and this has been the exact sort of vibe that I expected it would be. I had high expectations, and we definitely hit them. What scares you most about the Minnesota Wild heading into this game? If the Canucks are going to go into XL Energy Center and steal one on the road, what is the one spot on this Wild team that concerns you the most?
I think what concerns me the most, I don't know if this directly answers your question, but getting off to a quick start against a Canucks team who has routinely allowed the first goal of the game. And one of the surprising things when I kind of dug into the Wild before this show is that they are an incredibly good even strength team, but they kind of leave a little bit to be desired on special teams by the looks of it. The penalty kill, 27th in the NHL with 73.7%. Ouch. The power play, 19th overall at 19.7%. That's an area where the Canucks, again, they found a way to win games on this road trip. They're 4-1 on this road trip. It ends in Minnesota. They found ways to win despite not dominating really any game, right? They get pummeled by the Bruins, but he got a 2-0 shutout. Overtime wins over the Sabres and Red Wings. They lose the Pittsburgh Penguins on a second night of back-to-backs with Artur Shilov's in, who's just been really porous this season. But what scares me about the Wild is that they attack the Canucks at even strength, where they have been vulnerable, especially early in games, and they build an early lead, and then they just use their defense to close it out. So I think at the Canucks, it's weather the early storm and try to draw some penalties and capitalize on special teams.
What a coincidence, because you picked the exact thing that scares me about this game. But then again, to be fair, it scares me about pretty much every game that the Minnesota Wild play, is deviating from 5-on-5 and ending up having to kill a bunch of penalties off. The Wild have been pretty good in terms of being disciplined so far this season. They are, I believe, 3rd fewest in terms of penalty minutes so far this year. Yes, that still tracks. But you said it. Like, you look at the numbers, the penalty kill is at 73.7%. And they had to go on a nice run of 18 straight to even get it above 70%. This is a penalty kill that has been leaky, to say the least, over the last couple of years. And we've been trying, me and the listeners have been trying to narrow in on like specifically what the cause is. But it just goes to show you, like, this team would have probably, I don't know, half as many losses as they do if they just kept games at 5-on-5. So keep it 5-on-5, eliminate going on the penalty kill, eliminate going on the power play, because they're on like a 3-for-40 rut themselves. Like, just keep it 5-on-5, and I'll guarantee you the Minnesota Wild will win the game. But if this turns into a special teams showdown, I pray for an overtime at that point. I pray for 1 point and live to fight another day. So we'll see what happens, but vibes per 60 are going to be off the charts, because whether it be Quinn Hughes and Kirill Kaprizov, whether it be Elias Pettersson and Matt Boldy, whether it be Brock Besser, whether it be Carson Soucy, whether it be Marcus Johansson, whether it be Marcus Foligno, no shortage of oomph and star power in this matchup. So listeners, make sure that you get yourselves ready for this terrific tilt between these two teams, two top teams, alliteration aside, in the Western Conference. And Beggsy, appreciate having you on to break things down and see where the Canucks are at so far this season. And Wild listeners, Locked On Wild listeners, make sure to check out Locked On Canucks for more intel on this matchup and to just check in on Brock Besser for the rest of the season, because I know he's been linked to Minnesota as a potential off-season move as well. Make sure to hit that like button on YouTube. Make sure to hit that sub button on YouTube. And make sure to follow us wherever you listen so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week, because we have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.